Oh, I also have this thing about tax law. Maybe that'll be a break thing. I don't know. It can be a tax law podcast, right? Taxes, tax theory, tax. Those things are not too far apart. They both start with T's. Sound like they might have an X in them.
They do both start with T's.
I'm a software developer. I can express opinions about all sorts of fields that are not my own field. It's fine.
Hey, you bring up dead French old guys or old dead French guys a lot. So we can all bring up things that are not in our field. Okay, anyway, intro time. Hello and welcome to Fall Through, your source for deep conversations about technology, software, and computing. I'm your host, Chris Brando, also known as Scriptable, and on today's episode, we're talking about some more AI stuff. The main topic will be about, is AI output copyrightable? It's an interesting thing where me and Steve, who's on this panel, don't agree, or at least we don't think we agree. But you all know how this works. We talk, we might wind up agreeing. Maybe this will be the one time we don't agree. Who knows? As per usual, there'll be lots of bonus content for our supporters. If you're not a supporter already, head on over to fallthrough.fm/subscribe and become one. And if you're not following us on socials, please give us a follow there. And if you're on YouTube, hit that like button. We really appreciate it. With that, let's get into the show. Hello, viewer/listener. Welcome back to another episode. Today we've got a nice panel of us again. We're doing panels. We'll have guests again soon, don't worry. But we did have a couple guest episodes, so it's not like we're at a dearth for guests. We've had guests, now it's just back to some of us. I guess Steve is technically still a guest host, so he's technically a guest still. But yeah, we got a panel today of me and Matt and Steve. Matt, how are you doing today?
Good. Not prepared for whatever snow we're supposed to get, but it's fine.
Oh my god, the snow. Yeah, I feel like they're actually melting it now. They brought out the snow melters in the city because like it's too cold for the snow to melt on its own, and it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like like 2 days ago there were still like sidewalks where you just like couldn't cross because there was like 4 feet of snow. I'm just like, oh, okay, I guess I'm just gonna walk on the other side of the street, I suppose. So that snowstorm was a lot, but also not at the same time. It was weird. It's a weird time. People raided the grocery stores. It was,
oh god, what is
you would have thought like Armageddon was happening. Like the shelves were bare. I was like, it's 12 hours of snow. People were like, well, like one dude, I was talking to one dude in my building in the elevator, and he was like, well, I don't know, I gotta go buy water. I'm like, water? He's like, well, what if the pipes freeze? I'm like, sir, if pipes freeze in high rises in Manhattan, there's much bigger problems than the fact you don't have water.
You know, they run the pipes on the very outside, right? Like it's literally on the edge outside the building. So of course they can freeze.
Yeah, that's definitely where we put all of the core infrastructure for building, on the outside where all the windows are.
Yeah, exactly.
See, on one hand, we had Monday and Tuesday off school here in Austin because it did like there's a lot of ice came down, not a lot of snow, but a lot of ice. And but on the other hand, like a building, like my building did have a water pipe break and the building was without water for a full day. So it can happen.
It can. I mean, if I lived in a smaller building, maybe an older building, I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure. But I live in like new construction, high rise. I'm like, if our pipes start bursting, that's a big problem. Mostly just because the volume of water would probably be insane, and lots of people's apartments would be flooded and be not great. But Steve, how are you? How are you doing with this cold?
Doing good. Yeah, it was rough the start of the week, but it's coming out of it now. It's like more like gonna be 70 later today. So you know when it's like cold enough for ice to accumulate Monday and Tuesday, and then by now it's 70. So how the weather's going, but you know,
that must be nice because it's like I just looked. It's 12 degrees in New York, so quite the difference.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Nope. It's 8 degrees.
Can't believe you lied to me.
I agree. Cool. Kick him off.
Remove host. I can't even remove myself. There's not a button for that.
And that says something about Riverside. No.
Host has kicked themselves. I was like, what do we do? All right. So I was thinking earlier this week, you know, there's these court cases that have come out that have basically said code written by AIs or AI created code is not copyrightable. And I think I understand the logic of that, because in the US and I guess most of the world, because we all share copyright laws in like the basic framing of them, copyright can only, like, material can only be copyrighted if a human produced it, right? In the US, there's this kind of famous case of it was some sort of primate that got a photographer's camera and took a photo of itself with it. And there was this whole question of like, is this copyrightable? And the answer was like, no, because the animal took it, and animals cannot create copyrightable works. So like, it has to be a human. A human has to make the actual thing. And this is the reason why we say, okay, well, yeah, like AI, like code produced by AI is not copyrightable. The thing that kind of has me questioning this is like, how much of the code needs to be not written by a human, or in what way does it need to not be written by a human for it to not have copyright? Because like, I'm doing some PHP development again, and I'm using Symfony, and Symfony has a lot of generators. And there's many a framework that have this, like Rails also has a lot of generators. And these things spit out like a lot of code. And we usually call it like boilerplate, but it is like code. And I don't think that we've ever really argued that like your web app isn't copyrightable, because a lot of it was written by like these generators that are producing the output, because they're like, oh, well, you told the generator what to make and it produced some code, and now you have the code, and you also wrote some code around it. And I think for a lot of the code that people might be writing AI with, so like a good portion of it is boilerplate. There's probably some code that's novel, but I'm wondering like, where is that line between those two things if one is copyrightable and the other is not? And of course, you also go down to like, well, what are compilers doing? And also, we can talk about this later, but I have an interesting question, or an interesting thought about, if computers are doing everything with just like bits, and you can just represent bits as really big numbers, does that mean all programs and all knowledge that ever existed is just really big numbers? And if we can't copyright numbers, can you actually copyright anything then? But that's a more existential question. We got to deal with this one first. So Steve, I want to hear your defense of why AI output is not copyrightable.
Okay, so hilariously, I misunderstood what you said, and on this one, I actually kind of agree with you, sort of. But it's also... It's also different. No,
not even 7 minutes.
Yeah, no, this is good discussion, because there's a couple different things going on here. So the first one is there's the question of like, is producing an LLM a copyright violation? Is distributing the like results of an LLM copyright violation? Are like separate kinds of interesting questions. And so I thought you were talking about the like when you initially. Before this episode started, you're like, okay, we're going to talk about this thing. And he's like, because I believe this. And I was like, oh, I kind of believe the opposite. And the thing that I thought was being talked about is sort of the like, is training on material violating the copyright of that material side of the equation? But the outputs thing is also interesting, but they're like kind of a little different.
Right.
And one interesting aspect of that is there have been like lawsuits and a little bit of case law around this sort of like input side, but not really any around the output side for AI specifically. But there have been, as you bring up the like monkey photo case situation, there has been case law around the output side in like other circumstances that are not like AI related. And I do think that like what you said is kind of like the real question here, which is like how much human input is actually needed. And I think that a lot of this stuff is kind of going to expose how we have been very, very sloppy around intellectual property and the way that we think about it and talk about it in the industry, like in general. But it's all super interesting. So that's kind of background is like, I think I agree that like in general, there is case law that says that it's possible the output of LLMs cannot be copyrighted. However, I think that like the details are really fuzzy, and that's sort of like kind of the point of law stuff, and we'll see how it goes.
Right. I will say that there is like, I think what Disney and Universal are suing one of the big AI players because they were outputting like literally just their IP, and so there is like some like litigation happening around like the output of AIs and LLMs, or I guess image generation models, putting out copyright infringing work, and it being like, that's you can't do that. Like that infringes copyrights that exist.
Same time, like Disney is a giant evil company and I don't believe what they say. And so part of it too is like even reproducing a copyrightable work is not inherently copyright infringement because we have a thing called free use. Right. So like if you can get Claude to spit out one paragraph of Harry Potter verbatim, that does not mean that you're violating the copyright of J.K. Rowling, because like one paragraph, depending on the context, may not actually be like enough content to be like, you can't read the whole book. Like like the copyright is dealing with like reproducing the work. And so if you reproduce only part of the work and in a context that is like derived from it and significantly different enough, then it is not considered like a violation of copyright law. And I think that's where like a lot of all of this comes down to like thinking more clearly and specifically around like what all this stuff kind of like means. Drinking too much fizzy water, making me burp. So like, okay. So going way back to the history of this, way back to 1978.
So far, so long ago.
Like at the time we were forming copyright law, was the same time we were like inventing computers. So there's a really interesting kind of like race condition here of sorts where we didn't really know, like societally speaking, like what this whole computer thing was about and what it was doing and how important it was. But we were also trying to get copyright law shipped. And so the very original like 1978 Copyright Act, blah, 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 whatever US situation, they actually kind of put in a little carve out for software that was sort of like, we're going to start a commission on this and the commission is going to issue a ruling and that's going to like fill in what's happening with computers. And sort of the reason why is like we decided that a book, a story, a creative work is copyrightable, but a recipe, not a creative work, not copyrightable. Now, I think recipes are kind of creative works. It's a little complicated, but I'm just saying for the purposes of like 1978 copyright law, that is what was decided. And so the real question is a computer program closer to a recipe or closer to a novel? And so they went off, and I forget the name of it off the top of my head. Probably should Google this, but like the Commission for the Understanding of Copyright of Computers or like whatever it is, took a couple years, talked it over, and basically decided that a computer program is closer to a novel than a book, and therefore the source code of programs is copyrightable. But we like almost had a universe in which this whole entire question is moot because there was like no concept of copyright for source code, just like period. So like one way of thinking about this problem is like, was that a mistake? Like programs are kind of like recipes, really. Like why is it that a recipe was considered to be not creative work, but a novel was? Does gender have anything to do? I don't know. That could be a reason, maybe, possibly. I mean, who knows? It's fair. The 70s, you know, it's post women's lib. Everyone's equal now, right? Like that's totally.
I mean, like legit. Phone books are also not copyrightable, so it's not just
totally. But it's like some sort of weird line there, right? Where like we sort of decide, but again, like the purpose of copyright is that like by default, intellectual property is not real; it's made up. But we wanted to, for the encouragement of the development of the arts and sciences, we wanted to give people a temporary monopoly on distributing information, because the idea is that by doing that, it would create economic activity that would produce more of that kind of stuff. And that would be a net benefit for society. Like we, as like a collective people, are sort of like giving up our own rights to do whatever we want with our own words and thoughts, because we like agree that some people should be able to make money off of it, because that's like overall a benefit for all of us. I think a lot of people like kind of forget that's sort of the original like moral stance of copyright, is that like it's about improving society. Actually, it's not about individuals getting paid. It's not about some sort of like idea that like you inherently own the thing that you do. Like you in fact do not. We're just like temporarily giving you the ability to say that you do, because it's like better for humanity. And I think that there's like a big sort of, you know, the 78 was a long time ago, but I think that a lot of people at this point sort of like come from a very different sort of place when they think about what moral rights an author has. And they sort of see it as like the opposite, where like by default, the author has moral rights over their work, and that you can't do anything with it unless you say that, you know, unless they sign off on you being able to do that. And that's like, not the basis of the law, and it's not the basis of like the moral idea behind the law. And I think that if you interrogate that position, it comes from a good place, but I think that ultimately it strangles culture, and that's like a really big problem. And so balancing these questions is like non-trivial and tricky, and that's why all this stuff gets like a little weird, basically.
Yeah. I will say that as a slight correction, 1976 is the last time the copyright law was majorly revised. It wasn't like started in the 70s. It was started in like, I don't know, millennia ago, like in the probably 1200s or something like that. I don't know. Because the US has always had a copyright law. It's just changed as we've been able to create new things. As also was like, it used to be like 10 years or something like that. Maybe it was 20 years. It was some much shorter period of time. And now it's basically the life of the author plus 75 years or something like that.
Yeah. It was 14 years.
Okay.
The compilers thing is interesting too. I wish I had dug up my research about this, because I also got very interested in that exact question, because of that sort of with LLMs, I reach for compilers a lot, actually, in terms of like trying to think about how things work. And it's like, okay, like, how can we claim that the binary is, created by a human when like really I'm just pushing a button? And like, is that a separate creative work from my source code? Like, even if we agree that like source code is creative work, which is pretty well established, but like, whatever, like, okay, so we say that, like, how is pushing a button to compiler output part of it? And there's sort of there is this line about like, humans use tools to produce works. So the question is like, how much of the human needs to be involved for it to be considered to be a work that a human produced? Because it is true that copyright currently only considers the output of humans. And so like, there is sort of a question of can LLM output not be copyrighted? Is like very interesting one, and one that I think really, really hinges on that question of like, is the person doing the prompting to make the LLM do the work, does that mean that that's enough involvement to be considered enough for it to be copyrightable or not? And I think it definitely gets very fuzzy.
But I also think there's a point here where it's like, you can't copyright like a very general idea, right? Like J.K. Rowling does not have a copyright over the idea of wizards or like wizards that go to school, right? But she does have a copyright over wizards that have a lightning bolt scar on their forehead and go to a school, right? Or a school called Hogwarts, right? Like she has copyrights over like, it's the more specificity you have, the more copyrightable something is, which I think is where a lot of like this, okay, well, if we have an LLM, you can be much less specific to generate the output. So does the human input, since it is so much less specific, does that input fall under copyright? And then does that copyright carry forward with everything else? I think that's kind of like the big question here. But like, I don't know, like we as an industry, I mean, as you pointed out, like we don't really use the legal system to like, we don't actually run things through the legal system because it's big, expensive, and slow, and like big companies just don't want to deal with it. So we all just kind of do it based on vibes. We're like, okay, yeah, sure. Like, here's a license. And like, is this license scary enough to get a company to be like, I'm not going to try messing with that? And so far, we've had big scary licenses that are kind of being like, oh, well, I don't want to mess with that. But also, I think there's a question, I think you brought it up, of like, the person at the FSF that was like, no, LLMs are actually really great because they allow people to like use their computers as they wish. And like, that was the entire purpose of doing all of this stuff in the first place. And it makes me wonder if like now the copyrightability of code is kind of getting in the way of people being able to use computers as they really want to. Like the stringent like the strict rules in say GPL or like AGPL, where it's like, if you distribute, and we're going to say that this type of thing is distributing, and now you got to send all these notices and all of that, is that really in service of making people able to like use their own machines for what they want? Because like the dynamics of everything have changed, and I don't know if we have, like, the industry has not changed with them as far as like licenses are concerned, right? Our licenses are very old, and there's like basically only two types of them. There's like the permissive ones and the copyleft ones. And as time has gone on, I've kind of started to see the copyleft ones as like increasingly a product of what things were like in the 70s and 80s and not really aligned with where things are now. Because like the people distributing code in the 70s, 80s were big corporations. And it's like, yeah, no, we want to force these big corporations to do these things. And now that the people distributing code are like us, right? Like individuals doing stuff and like putting out our own time. And like, it gets really messy when you have conflicting licenses for things, right? This is why ZFS can't ship inside the Linux kernel, even though arguably ZFS is like a really great file system, and it should be one of the many file system options that's just like with Linux, but like all of the distros have to like bend over backwards to be like, we're not actually distributing it as part of the same thing. So these license conflicts like they're not actually really conflicting. And it's like, is that really in service of people being able to like actually use their computers better? Or have we like lost the plot point here? And now we're just like really about enforcing the way we did things before, so we want to keep things that way. And we're like, no, we have to run the world this way, even though I think there's a plausible reality where if we got rid of the copyleft licenses, not a whole lot would wind up changing. Because like, yeah, I don't know, big companies have other ways of stealing your code. Like as pointed out by Oracle and Google, you can just like re-implement it. They have the resources to just re-implement your thing if they want to. They could also just take the code, but they can also just like re-implement it. So I think there's like also a lot of like us as an industry, we've been stuck for a long time making assumptions about software and code and all of this that I don't think have held true for several decades now. And I think LLMs and AIs are forcing us to kind of reevaluate a lot of it.
Yeah. It's based on a software distribution model that is like literally before the web existed.
Right.
And like not really significantly updated our like understandings and the mechanisms. And part of that is just because you're trying to fit the legal system that exists into our understanding of how the world works, and like how things, operate. But like, yeah, I don't know. I have like I used to care a lot about licenses, and like for professional reasons, I care about licenses. Like I follow all these rules, because that's like important in those terms. But like conceptually, like I used to see like license choice as like a meaningful site of struggle in the battle for free culture. And like now I just don't at all, basically. Like I think it's not really relevant actually anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think that the one place where like I think people are like, it is relevant is like in open source or really source available now products with companies built around them. And it's like, but like that's a bigger question of like, how do we actually support, source available software development as a whole? Because building a company around it and like having all your licensing, like using licensing is just like not a great mechanism, because then people start feeling rug pulled, because you also have all of like the CLAs you make people sign so that you can change the license if you want to change the license, if it becomes advantageous for you to change the license. And it's just very complicated I'm not entirely sure what benefit, and especially now that we have LLMs, it's going to be even more messy, because like I feel like a lot of the ability to enforce licenses has been from the traceability of it, of like, well, this is obviously the same code, but now LLMs are probably going to enable people to like rewrite code and then just obfuscate it to the point where it's like, I don't know. And if it's, you're using cloud stuff and you get sued, you can like all that cloud stuff can come up in discovery and be like, okay, well, you obviously prompted the AI to steal this code and then blah, 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 blah. But like if you're using local models, then like as soon as the inference is done, like, if you don't persist the output, then it's just gone. And so it's like, yeah, no, you could just spend a bunch of time just like laundering code to be, oh, it's this thing, but it's not. It's different. And unless everybody starts shoving poems into their wire protocols, then there's like not a whole lot that people can do to protect themselves, which is also an insane thing that Oracle does. I can't. It's the
Matt,
way.
you've been quiet.
What?
I said, Matt, you've been quiet.
Oh,
We've been talking too much. Not letting
No,
you
it's
get in
fine.
all your words.
No, please, you can keep talking. I'm exhausted, honestly. So it's just one of those weeks. It's been such a busy week for me. And like, I don't know, the whole, like for me personally, the whole idea of copyright, like I've never had a good experience with it. You know what I mean? It always felt to me as like a way for someone to protect work out of fear rather than like out of originality. So I don't know. I've always seen it wielded as more of a weapon rather than like a shield, I guess is the way I'm saying it. So like I'm okay with it burning down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's kind
in
of
theory, like copyright law is supposed to make it so that Disney cannot steal your personal creative output. Do you have any faith that in reality, if Disney decided to violate your copyright laws, like rights, that would be the case? Like,
right. Exactly.
I just don't personally at all. So that's like the problem.
Yep. You'd just be tied up in court against them or whatever to some degree, and then they can outlast you in that battle. So like you lose either way. And to me, that's where it's like it's kind of silly. And as far as like LLMs, you know, the work from LLMs being copyrightable, like I don't know. I don't even know what to think of it anymore. Like if LLMs train on all of this work that has or does not have copyright on it, I don't know what that does to the output. You know what I mean? Like it's so intermingled that I don't even know what to make of the output anymore.
Yeah, the traceability thing, right? It goes back to that. Like I have read most of these books. A lot of the words that I have said on this podcast have come from me like ingesting the copyrighted content of these books and then putting that into my brain and then having my brain spit out, you know, words. But like that's sufficiently transformative, hopefully, that like, you know, it's not like a violation of their ideas or like I'm not stealing or whatever. And so like what I originally thought, Chris, when you first said the thing was like, I was like, I don't see how training an LLM is different than a human learning a thing, actually, like really from like a copyright perspective. Like you are not like a giant 100 gigabyte text file with 1 billion floats in it is not the contents of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Like you are not reproducing the copyrighted work. So it's like definitely not like violating copyright in the traditional sense of like you are redistributing the words that are the original thing. You are distributing something derived from it. And so like that feels like very clear and natural to me. I think it does not to a lot of people. And I know that a lot of people have sort of various complicated feelings about LLMs being sort of trained on their material. But I also don't like, you sort of get back to the sort of moral basis for copyright of like, we're trying to produce more culture. Like I talked about this with a friend who's like really into bands, and I'm like, okay, like, you know, we grew up in the punk scene. Like if the early punk bands were able to own the genre of punk music, and you had to like every punk band ever had to give, one of the questions is who is the band that started that in the first place, right? Or like whatever, like which band is it that you like say is the original one or whatever, you know? So let's pick one that's obviously false for silly reasons. Like let's say that like every band that's a grunge band ever needs to pay Nirvana $1 every time they make a song because Nirvana invented the idea of grunge, and therefore like I'm just gonna make everyone older than me mad. That's like the response that some people have to like the LLM training question is sort of like the Ghibli thing was like people were like, I can't believe you would like steal his style, and it's like hold on, like the man is a master artist. All of that anime is wonderful. It's great. You know, but like also like you don't own a visual style. Like that's like not a thing that you can do, because like once you start going down that track, you like destroy culture, because nobody is able to create things because all of creation is based in part on what came before it. And so if we want to like try to trace the constituent chunks of your inspiration that led to the people that you were inspired by so that you have to pay them to produce a work, like that's just like not feasible as a thing. Right. And it also stifles creativity. It does the opposite of the point of copyright law, which is to give people a way to live while being artists. Like that's like kind of the idea here is like, we're going to give you a temporary exclusive results over some of the parts of your work so that you can make a living. And like claiming that people can like own a certain style does not further culture or society. It makes it grind to a halt, actually. And I think that's like a weird tension here, is that like I definitely want Miyazaki to make more cartoons, and like I mean he's retiring or whatever supposedly again, so like, you know, like he should also be able to retire at this point. But like, you know, I want to encourage more Miyazakis. Like I want him to be able to have a life while doing that. I want his artists to be able to be paid, but at the same time I want other great anime authors to be able to like build off of his work and produce. Also, like there will be another guy who's as good at Miyazaki as at making anime, like, and he will inevitably be, or she will inevitably be inspired by Miyazaki in some way. And so you just like can't build a system where every person forever, perpetually in the future, like owes the estate of this person, you know, $1 every time they make a thing. That just like doesn't work.
Right. I feel like music has tried to solve this problem a bit. Like I'm thinking about like how covers are like under the acceptable use exclusion to copyright. And it's like, yeah, it's the same words. Like in the show Heated Rivalry, they have the scene where they have where they're playing All the Things She Said by Tattoo, and that transitions into this other version of All the Things She Said by Harrison. And it's like a very different feeling song, but it's the same words, right? The lyrics are the same. And it served this like really interesting creative element in the show of this like storytelling thing of switching between these two songs. And it's like, yeah, but like that dude, as I've like listened to more of his music, he's just like done a ton of these covers where it's like his own style of music set to like the words that we know from popular songs. And it's like he can just do that. And arguably that is good because that is like that really is like a transformative work, right? That is like a new creative thing that's been done, even though it's repurposing old things, which is like most of the stuff that we do is like repurposing old ideas or old things into like new stuff. And so there's like this interesting balance that exists in the copyright because also there's the other problem of like, you know, two dudes invented calculus, right? At the same time, like unbeknownst to each other, like people can like create things simultaneously. And when you have a planet with like somewhere between 8 and 10 billion people on it, 8 billion if you can't count, 10 billion if you can, like there's bound to be many people who come up with like the same idea, like eerily kind of the almost exact same idea, especially if they share like so much culture with each other. So it's like, okay, we can sit here and be like, oh no, like you stole that idea, but like what is stealing an idea? Like what? I guess this goes back to like the root of the question. It's like, why do you think you get to own things? Like, why do you get to think that you get to own the creative output? Like, because of you thought about something, because you created it, that now you own that thing. Like, that's a concept that we're all very comfortable with because we grew up in like Western culture where that's like a very big thing that happens. But there have been cultures where it's just like, nah, you don't own things. Also, even in Western culture, you don't really like ownership is like what the government allows you to own, not like an own. Like people say, oh, I want to own my house. I'm like, you don't really, like, the government can come by and be like, nah, that's ours now. Get out. Like you don't own things in the way that I think people think that they own things.
Yeah. And like, it's definitely, yes, there's like, the thing I wanted to say based on what earlier you're saying, and the thing I want to say based on what you're saying right now, my girlfriend's favorite band is Led Zeppelin. And like, there's 4 guys in Led Zeppelin. One of them is dead. The other 3 are alive. We went and saw this cover band as this tribute band because they're different or whatever, called Led Zeppelin 2. And we're both like, how do you get away with calling your band Led Zeppelin 2? Like, most of the times bands like this have like some sort of different name that's like whatever. And I can only imagine that it's like, they're just not big enough for Atlantic or whoever it was to like get upset about, but like they are like touring or whatever. And like, it's interesting because like on one hand, like, you know, they're like Presence was 50 years ago. So now we're going to play some songs off of it for you. And like, I can't go see Led Zeppelin perform this album, like, cause one of them's dead. Just like as a base thing, but also like today they're not going to play in the same way that like they would have in the 70s. And so it's like kind of literally impossible to go see them originally. So like from a culture perspective, like that, you know, I turned 40 over the weekend. I'm feeling old lately, you know, whatever. But like, there's like some like 70-year-old folks like slow dancing while laying their canes on the ground. And like they're reliving their youth, and like being able to see this band playing those Led Zeppelin songs is like a good thing for society and culture. But like the question about like, can they do that? And if not, by paying people and who, is like very, very interesting. And this this thing also is like very interesting to me because we went and saw a different show, which is the Led Zeppelin Experience, which is the drummer who is dead. His son is also a drummer and basically has his own Led Zeppelin tribute band where he runs around and plays this stuff as well. And it's like kind of interesting because I'm not sure which one of the two bands is better, but you do have like the one band that has this like somewhat of like a moral argument of like, I am literally this guy's son, making the music that, you know, like my dad made, versus like random people. And so, you know, it's just kind of like, it's good. And I guess like ultimately that's the thing is like, I'm glad that both of these bands exist and they're both apparently able to tour. And I've given both of them money because I like enjoyed their creative output. But you know, in a world where like the original four guys owned everything about what they did, like that would not really be possible in the same way. And I think that we would be like worse off as a society for that reason. And so the problem is the balance and figuring out like where that is basically. And I'm kind of the opinion that like the more restrictive versions only help people who have a lot of money, and less restrictive versions like do let those people rip you off, but they were also going to rip you off in a situation where the protections were stronger too, because they can. So it like feels like erring on the side of free expression makes more sense to me personally in general.
Right.
But also I've been paid to mostly do open source for like 15 years and most people aren't. And so it's like also weird because like I have made a living doing this, but like also I know that like not other people are able to, and that also is complicated. So it's easy for me to say this.
Yeah. I mean, I think as with so many things, like the root problem here is less of a, like if you focus on like this little thing, it's easy to be like, okay, well, like maybe there's no good answers or whatever. But I think it's just like, there are bigger problems that we all need to solve that we just have decided we're not going to solve that lead to these smaller things. Like the worry about like some big company stealing your work is about big companies being jerks. And like, that's something we should all probably fix because big companies being jerks leads to a lot of problems. It leads to like lots of pollution or like bad products or like dangerous products. And it's like, okay, well, we should probably make it so that companies aren't jerks as much, which is like a hard thing to do because it's not, I mean, I think a lot of people are just like, just make the CEOs better. I'm just like, no, but they're like, companies are made up of like often like tens of thousands of people when we're talking about these big companies. Like that's a very complex machine. And like the reasons why that machine does what it does is not big person at top or a few people at top want it to do evil things, so it does evil thing. Like it's much more complicated than that. So I think like that's a problem we have to fix, but also just like we got to make it so people can like freaking live and then also like actually live their lives, because the whole 40-hour work week, 5 days a week eats into like a substantial part of your life. So it's like if we instead had 20-hour work weeks, it'd be a lot easier to like have a full-time job and to be a creative, and maybe you wouldn't need to rely, we wouldn't have to pick between the two, and this would all be much less of a problem. Because a lot of the time, like the issue of the copyright comes up when someone is taking your work and therefore taking money out of your wallet. So now you can't do that work yourself because you can't survive on this anymore because people are either leaking it or they are outright stealing it, or someone is just like, you know, some form of like they're creating something that cheapens your work, which you only really care about, or I think majorly care about if that is your livelihood. Like I think a lot of artists are like, oh, I make a living off of these, you know, the comics I make or whatever I make. And now these LLMs are spitting out comics that look just like mine. So now that in a way takes away something that was unique about what I was doing. And now I have to shift how I produce things. Or maybe I won't even be able to shift. Maybe I won't be able to do this at all anymore. And that does stifle creativity in a way, because now it's like, okay, now nobody is going to do this. So this whole art form might just die because it's easy to reproduce this thing, or you can just get it to spit it out for free instead of having to pay for it. So there's also things around like maybe the solution to this isn't so much the like, oh, we need to stop LLMs from outputting this, but instead like if an LLM outputs something that is close enough to this thing, then someone should get like a royalty of some sort. And if you don't want to pay royalties, then like don't use LLMs or something like that. I mean, there's lots of like hand wavy like, how do you actually enforce that? But you don't need to be perfect, right? We don't need perfect systems. We just need systems that like fix the actual identifiable problems that we are having, which also requires us to actually identify the problems that we are having, which I don't think we've done a good job of as a society at this point. I think we just like LLM thing makes it so people can steal, so it's bad. And I'm like, okay, we got to get a little bit more nuanced about like what the actual problem is. I also think that people are having existential, like, I had a conversation with a friend recently, and I realized that I have moved very far into like the, I guess, acceptance of like LLMs as tools. Like I don't buy into the hype stuff. Like people are still doing crazy stuff. Like I saw Claude or I guess it's like Model Bot or whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, okay, come on, people. Like this, I get it. Be creative, go do the thing. But you're also, some of you are like on the fringe. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But I think like LLMs are an incredibly powerful tool that we should not just kind of leave on the sidelines because like people might do something bad with them. But my friend is still very much in the like, oh, LLM's bad, right? Or AI bad, or like people that make AI are bad. We had this like interesting little exchange where kind of, as I pushed back and I like added more nuance, we kind of devolved into like, it can't do math. They made it worse than a calculator. I'm like, well, why would it need to be a calculator? We don't need better calculators. We have good calculators already. Like an LLM is not a calculator. But I think which is like an often refrain from people that are just frustrated with AI. And like, I understand that frustration. But I think like, as I've moved more into like, oh, these are like useful tools that we should have and we should be using, I think I've also started to question like, how much are these things different from what people are doing? Like, I mean, I think I had the knee-jerk reaction of saying like, these things aren't thinking. But I was like, what is thinking though? Like what is, and is there only one type of thinking? I mean, we know that's wrong. We know that people have different ways of thinking. Some people think in words, other people think in not words. So it's like, okay, well, we can't really define what thinking is for people, and there's a wide variance in what it is for people, then why does this thing also not get to say it's thinking? Which is also like, why don't we say that like people are like, well, animals don't think. I'm like, but I think that they do think. I think they just don't think like we think. But like this thing, it clearly is doing something that looks like thinking. Why can't we just say it's thinking? And I think it's because people have this view of computers as like this one thing that is like separate from biological people or from humans and doesn't have humanity. And so there's all these questions. And they've also watched too much sci-fi. Like, honestly, sci-fi authors have probably done society a very large disservice in their writing. Like, I get it. You had really cool ideas. You were trying to tell us lots of things about society. And if you strip away some of these problems, yada, yada. But like the net negative is that people didn't learn from the lessons, really. They didn't take those lessons that they were probably trying to teach you about in like Star Trek and all this other stuff. And they did take, oh, we should be able to talk to a computer. And I'm like, that's the wrong thing to take from this material. But I think people really like are just worried that like, oh no, this thing's gonna like destroy the world. And I'm like, it's much more likely that humans are gonna destroy the world before any like machine does or computer does or AI system does. But I think it's like people are just fearful of new things, but also they are fearful when definitions of things shift, even if the definition that we had before wasn't really a definition. It was just like vibes. Like people don't like the idea of just vibes being exposed. And I think that's what's happening with thinking, where it's like, yeah, our definition of thinking was mostly just vibes. We're just like, it's the thing that humans do and nobody else does or nothing else does. And it's like, I don't know. I think other things are doing it. And I think it's a disservice to humans to think that we only think in words, because there's lots of humans that don't, which can make it harder to do things like do public speaking. Like I think Ian and I have talked about this on the podcast before, but like Ian doesn't think in words, whereas I do think in words, which is why it's very easy for me to monologue, because I don't have to do translation. But like when he speaks, he has to translate from like what he thinks into words. And like there's a lot of people that are like that, which is why they aren't good at the public speaking thing. So I think like putting like thinking in words as this thing that only humans do, and that's what thinking is, does a disservice to humans, but it also kind of does a disservice to like these LLMs. And it's like, oh, well, those are not doing the thing that humans are doing, so that's bad and we shouldn't think about them like humans. I'm like, there's lots of ways we should, and there's lots of reasons why we should. More nuance, basically.
Yeah. It's like, there's also the like, who cares if it's thinking or not? Like I didn't try to figure out if my compiler is intelligent. It's a tool that does a job. And like maybe a compiler is doing thinking and maybe not. And, you know, again, gestures at the Steve almost went to grad school in the humanities kind of like bookshelf. Like what is thinking is an interesting question. And there's lots of people who've done a lot of thinking about that. But like ultimately at the end of the day, I don't really care if LLMs are thinking or not when I'm trying to like write some code and they're helping me. Like the question of like, is it truly authentically thinking like a human does, or is it something different, is like not actually relevant. What's relevant is, can the tool do the job that I'm asking it to do? Which like, can it think or not is like upstream of that question, or like at least we kind of like believe it's upstream of that question. And that's why we're debating it. But like on some level, there's also the like, is this a fun intellectual exercise, or is this like a justification to deny the usefulness of a tool because we're not talking about the usefulness of the tool anymore? It's like a way of moving the conversation away from like, okay, well, it can't do its job because it's not really thinking. And it's like, well, it's not the case though, because it can do the job even if it's not thinking. Like, so there's like a little bit of like, some of this is also just like rhetoric in like a classic sense of like a maneuver to try to get into the outcome that people want in conversations. And so it's like easier to reach for something that's like pretty unfalsifiable, like does an LLM think, as opposed to like interrogating the actual questions, which is like, what is it capable of? Even if those are connected questions, like it doesn't mean that it's capable of something or not is determined by like, can it think or not? And that's definitely like, it's a little unsettling. Like, we used to think that you needed to be able to think things in order to produce stuff, but now we have these weird machines that produce stuff possibly by not thinking. Like them not thinking is actually like a weirder and more confusing outcome here, basically. like there's like a weird part in which like they definitely don't think is like, okay, but you know that's like the more insane outcome though. Like you're saying that like if you had told me 15 years ago that like you could push a machine and and it would give me a response back and it would do that by not thinking, I would think that's weirder than like we invented a machine that can think. So, you know, there's also that whole question is just like an interesting tangent, but it's also like kind of immaterial to like the things that I think are most important in like the question of how is this going to change the world? What is the impact on society? What is the impact on our profession? Like those questions are like more interesting to me than like, is it thinking or not necessarily? I mean, that question is interesting to me, but for like separate reasons, basically. All right, shall we move to break? Because I'm getting sleepy.
I don't. You're supposed to get more awake.
I know.
As you go.
I know.
Oh wait, Matt's gone. Okay. I guess this was just a. Oh no, Matt's still here.
Sorry, I'm trying to fix something in the background here.
Yeah, because you had like zero commentary there.
I don't care about copyright at all. I mean, honestly, like, I don't know, man. I mean, part of it is because I'm so tired, and like, not because of this. It's been a week. It's been a week.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is it's just like all of this is just. I just see it as ways of companies staying in power. You know what I mean? And to me, it's I don't know. I've never seen copyright like protect the right person or the right holder, I guess. So.
I mean, it's definitely protected the right holder, but not the right holder.
Yeah. Ha. All right, we're going to break.
Okay. So, viewer/listener, how did you like that discussion? It did start and end with a lot of copyright talk. It turns out that copyright does underpin a lot of our stuff we do in tech. But let us know your thoughts in the usual places: social media, Gopher Slack, Changelog Zulip, or wherever you might find your lovely fall through host or fall through guest. This episode of Fall Through was hosted by Chris Brando with co-host Ish, Matthew Snobria, and guest co-host Steve Klabnik. Fall Through is produced by Chris Brando, and our beats are by Breakmaster Cylinder. And to break.